We've reached the halfway point for one of the most audacious economic transformations in modern history. 9 years ago, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman stood up and essentially declared war on his own country's economy. He announced Vision 2030, a plan to spend hundreds of billions of dollars building an entirely new Saudi Arabia that could survive without oil. The question everyone's asking now is this $500 billion bet actually working? Or is it turning into the most expensive fantasy in human history? We now have enough data to give you the real answer, and it's going to surprise you because while the headlines focus on NEOM's futuristic cities and $500 billion price tags, the actual story of what's working and what's failing is completely different from what you've been told. My name is Elizabeth Ann Stewart, and you are watching Geopolitics and Money. Follow the money, decode the world. Let me set the stage, because understanding Vision 2030 requires understanding the existential crisis that it created. Saudi Arabia has been trying to diversify away from oil since the 1970s. Every time oil prices crashed, they'd announce new plans. Every time oil prices recovered, though, those plans would quietly disappear. It's the classic resource curse. When you can just pump money out of the ground, why do the hard work of actually building up industries? But 2016 was different. Oil had crashed from over $100 a barrel to under $30. The Saudi budget deficit hit a 15% of GDP. They were burning through foreign reserves at an unprecedented rate. And for the first time, Saudi leadership realized something terrifying. Peak oil demand might actually happen in their lifetime. So MBS did something unprecedented. He announced a Vision 2030, a comprehensive plan to rebuild Saudi Arabia's entire economy by 2030. The numbers were staggering. $500 billion for NEOM alone, hundreds of billions more for other mega projects, complete social transformation, economic diversification, the whole package. The timeline was impossibly ambitious. The goals seemed delusional. The price tag was astronomical. And now, in 2025, the midpoint, we can actually measure the results. Here's what nobody expected. Some parts of Vision 2030 are working so well, they've exceeded their targets by massive margins. Other parts are such spectacular failures, they're quietly being scaled back to tiny fractions of their original scope. The question is, which is which? Let's start with the official numbers, because Saudi Arabia released their 2024 progress report, and the results are remarkable. According to City Research's comprehensive analysis, Saudi Arabia has made significant progress or exceeded targets on 5 out of 18 major goals, satisfactory progress on 9 goals, and needs enhanced momentum on only 4 goals. That's approximately an 85% success rate at the midpoint of this project. But here's where it gets interesting. The goals they're crushing are completely different from the ones getting all the media attention. Here are the big wins. The private sector is actually contributing to GDP. The target was 35% by 2030. They hit 47% in 2024, 6 years early. This is huge. It means that Saudi businesses are actually becoming competitive and creating real value beyond oil. Unemployment. The target was 7% by 2030. They hit 7% in 2024. Again, 6 years early. Saudi unemployment has fallen from 12.9% in 2016 to 7% today, with 437,000 Saudis getting private sector jobs in 2024 alone. Foreign direct investment. They're now attracting $25.6 billion annually, a 50% increase from 2022. International investors are actually putting serious money into Saudi Arabia beyond oil and gas. Women in the workforce. This is probably the most dramatic social transformation in modern Middle Eastern history. Female workforce participation jumped from 19.7% in 2018 to 36.3% in 2025. Female unemployment dropped to 10.5%. These are not marginal improvements. They're fundamental structural changes to Saudi society and economy. So if Vision 2030 is working so well, why does everyone think it's failing? Because the parts that are failing are the parts that everyone's talking about. And the scale of those failures is absolutely mind-blowing. Let's talk about NEOM, because this is where Vision's 2030's ambitions collided with reality so hard it created a crater visible from space. The original vision was a 170-kilometer linear city called the Line, housing 9 million people with 500-meter-tall mirrored skyscrapers running through the desert. We've all seen pictures of it, or what it was supposed to look like. The cost? $500 billion. Timeline, operational in 5 years by 2030. Now, the current 2025 reality. They're now targeting a 2.4 kilometer stretch, that's 1.5 miles, to be completed by 2030. They've quietly abandoned 99% of the original scope. Let me put that in perspective. They went from promising a city longer than the distance from Boston to New York to delivering something smaller than a typical suburban mall development. The official line is that this is phased development. The reality is that someone finally did the math and realized that a building 170 kilometers of 500-meter tall skyscrapers in the middle of the desert might actually be impossible or close to it. But here's what's even more telling. Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund just hired consulting firms to conduct a strategic review of the line's feasibility. That's corporate speak for we're trying to figure out how to cancel this thing without looking like complete idiots. The problem isn't just technical, it's financial. NEOM's official budget is $500 billion. Saudi Arabia's entire sovereign wealth fund is worth about $700 billion. They were planning to spend 70% of their national savings on one project. And that was before oil prices fell and construction costs exploded. So here's the question. If the mega projects are failing, why am I telling you that Vision 2030 is actually working? Because there's a completely different story happening beneath all the NEOM headlines. While everyone was watching the line's futuristic renders, Saudi Arabia was quietly building a real economy. The Public Investment Fund, their sovereign wealth fund, has grown from $150 billion in 2015 to $700 billion today. That's not just oil money sitting in accounts. That's active investments in everything from Uber and Tesla to Saudi startups and infrastructure projects. Small and medium enterprises now contribute 21.9% of GDP, up from practically nothing in 2016. They're targeting 35% by 2030, and they're on track to hit it. Tourism has also exploded. Saudi Arabia issued 27.4 million tourist visas in 2023. Before Vision 2030, tourism was basically limited to religious pilgrimages. Now they're building a legitimate tourism industry more or less from scratch. Their entertainment sector is booming. Saudi Arabia went from having essentially no entertainment industry to hosting Formula One races, boxing matches, concerts, and film festivals. The cultural transformation is unprecedented. But here's the most important change. Saudi Arabia is building institutional capacity. They're creating regulatory frameworks, professional services, financial markets, and legal systems that can support a diversified economy. This is the boring stuff that doesn't get the headlines, but it's the foundation that makes everything else possible. Here's what might be really happening. Vision 2030 was never about actually building the line or NEOM. Those are shiny objects designed to capture global attention and attract investment. The real Vision 2030 is about using oil wealth while they still have it to build the infrastructure for a post-oil economy. The mega projects are marketing. The economic diversification is the product. Think about it. If you're going to transform a conservative oil-dependent kingdom into a modern, diversified economy, you need to signal dramatic change to both your own people and international investors. NEOM serves that purpose perfectly, even if most of it never gets built. Meanwhile, the real work happens quietly. Training Saudi workers, building private companies, creating financial markets, developing tourism, reforming social policies, and diversifying the economy sector by sector. The genius of this approach is that it works even if the mega projects fail. NEOM gets the headlines, but the economic transformation gets the results. So this is just my personal assessment at the 2025 midpoint. Vision 2030 is both a spectacular success and a spectacular failure, depending on which sections of it you are measuring. If you measure it by whether they're building impossible futuristic cities, it's failing pretty badly. But if you're measuring it by whether they're succeeding in diversifying their economy away from oil dependence, it is succeeding remarkably well. The real question for the next 5 years is whether they can maintain this momentum as oil revenues decline and mega project costs escalate. Saudi Arabia is essentially running two parallel experiments. Can they build a post-oil economy fast enough to survive the end of the oil age? And the early results on that suggest they can, but it requires continuing to focus on the boring stuff that works. Job creation, private sector development, institutional capacity, rather than the shiny stuff that captures attention. The $500 billion bet isn't really about building NEOM. It's about buying time to transform an entire society before the oil runs out or the world stops buying it. And so far, despite all the headlines about mega project failures, that transformation is actually working. What do you think? Is Vision 2030 a brilliant long-term strategy disguised as mega project craziness? Or are they just getting lucky while wasting enormous amounts of money? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into how countries really transform their economies, make sure to subscribe. As always, follow the money, decode the world. And a big thank you to our Patreon members.